Welcome back to Fascinating History, where today we will discuss Tudor England's era. Imagine going back in time to the 16th century, a time of political intrigue, religious strife, and rigid social conventions. Ah, the scent of Tudor England. It's a potent cocktail of filth, open drains, and squalor like no other. Smallpox, plagues, and other contagious illnesses were commonplace on the streets. Maintaining good health was extremely difficult, for there was no access to current medical knowledge, immunizations, or clean water. Your social standing in Tudor England was defined by your place of birth. It was difficult to move across classes because of the rigorous social structure. Additionally, King Henry VIII killed people like it was going out of style, while treason laws silenced opponents. Here, beneath the vast story of England's history, we dive into an intricate saga that transcends time and space, illuminating the legends of the Tudor England era. Henry VIII. Henry was a rather healthy young man in his youth, but that progressively changed throughout his life. Henry enjoyed women, music, and jousting, perhaps a little too much. He had several jousting injuries throughout his life, leaving him with chronic pain and mobility problems. One in particular was a leg wound he sustained in 1536, which never completely recovered and perhaps had a role in forming an ulcer. He was frequently unable to walk or stand for extended periods due to this wound, which also seemed to give him a great deal of agony and anguish. Henry put on weight over the years and became very overweight. According to some estimates, he was close to 400 pounds at the time of his death. The weight increase was presumably a result of his extravagant lifestyle, which featured exquisite buffets full of food, and with his limited mobility, his weight eventually caused various additional health issues, such as diabetes, high blood pressure, and worst of all, heart disease. Henry was also said to have experienced various mental health problems, such as depression, anxiety, and paranoia, among others. Therefore, they had a king who was paranoid, obese, unhappy, and physically crippled. On top of all that, he is on some sort of twisted crusade to produce a male heir, and was prepared to rewrite his kingdom's religion to ensure that he may wed anyone he chooses. It was neither a favorable indication for those in Henry VIII's court, nor a prescription for steady leadership. When it comes to dating, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to live up to the standards we present on social media. The Tudor period had its kind of social media in the form of a gorgeously painted portrait. Imagine that you set up a date for your friend based on a picture of them. In this example, a beautiful oil painting, but that he ended up disliking the woman so badly that he had you beheaded because she did not live up to his standards. This occurred in the relationship between Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell. By the time Henry VIII's third wife, Jane Seymour, died while giving birth, the situation had gotten out of hand. Cromwell had worked his way up through the ranks, starting off as the son of a lowly blacksmith and eventually becoming Henry VIII's chief minister of the country and one of the most powerful men in the country. A huge amount of responsibility comes along with great power. Because of this, Cromwell was given the responsibility of locating Henry VIII's future wife, and in 1539, he married Henry to Anne of Cleves, who was a German princess from the Duchy of Cleves. The primary motivation for this marriage was political. Cromwell was of the opinion that if Germany joined forces with the other Protestant states, it would be able to counteract the growing supremacy of the Catholic Habsburg monarchy. Cromwell relied heavily on the portraits that Henry VIII's court painters had created. When Anne arrived in England, Henry was underwhelmed by her looks compared to the drawings he had seen of her. The king argued that she did not resemble the picture and that she was not to his liking. He said that he saw nothing in this lady that was consistent with what men had been saying about her. Henry VIII started to assume that Cromwell had arranged the marriage and was trying to fool him by presenting a portrait that didn't legitimately represent her. This led Henry to believe that Cromwell was trying to trick him. Not long after the dispute, Cromwell was eventually prosecuted with heresy and treason on July 28, 1540. Even though there isn't much evidence to support or dispute this, some people say that Cromwell's opponents brought the executioner so that he would screw up the whole procedure. However, there isn't much evidence to support or refute this. There are also many different versions detailing how quickly or violently the beheading took place. Others maintain that it took a series of strokes, while others believe that it was accomplished with a single fast hit. The Treason Act. It's possible that King Henry VIII enjoyed carrying out executions more than feasting during his reign. The so-called Treason Act of 1534 gave him further justification to carry out his penchant for killing people. It virtually turned Tudor England into a nightmare like George Orwell's 1984, in which people who committed thought crimes were punished in an essentially arbitrary manner. Henry split with Rome and established the Church of England, largely because he wished for an impossible divorce from Catholicism. As a result, he became the head of the English Church in an effort to solidify his authority and impose his control over religious affairs. Henry also built the Church of England. This break with Rome was partly motivated by his need for a masculine heir, his hatred toward the Pope, and his growing interest in the ideas of the Protestant Church, to name a few of the personal, political, and theological causes behind it. Henry introduced the Treason Act in 1534 to bolster his power as the head of the English Church. Now, the treason was a crime that carried the death penalty. This made a few things illegal, such as asserting that Henry was either a heretic or a tyrant, challenging his position as the church leader, and expressing ill will against either the king or the queen. Simply, the act was enacted to end any dissent and ensure obedience to the king. In addition to that, it had a chilling effect on the public discourse in England. People had to be very careful about anything they said or wrote in public that was critical of the king or queen, since doing so may result in being charged with treason and given heavy punishment. In other words, they needed to exercise extreme caution. Henry VIII used the Treason Act as a weapon to thwart any potential threats to his reign. Anyone who did not agree with him or his points of view ran the prospect of being charged with treason and treated cruelly. Weird ways to die. Significant shifts occurred in England's social and economic atmosphere during the time of the Tudors. An increasing number of people were moving from more rural regions to the cities, and as a direct result of this, there was a range of new surroundings and technologies that, while they may seem commonplace to us now, were still in the process of being sorted out during that period. For example, arsenic was a common poison used in Tudor England for various purposes. These purposes included the obvious use of rat poison, a way for one to get rid of another person he didn't like, and medicine. Arsenic, which could be obtained in several forms and was not difficult to get, was commonly used by people to eradicate rats and other unwanted vermin from their homes and places of business. Bane became commonplace and needed by households for tea or wheat, and sure enough, individuals would mix the two ingredients, resulting in disastrous outcomes. Again, when more people moved into cities, there was an inevitable increase in the number of rats. In one incident, a housewife in Leicestershire named Barbara Gilbert thought she was adding flour to a meal she was cooking for her family. Instead, what she was actually doing was adding salt. She decided to play around with her dinner, and as a result, she ended up poisoning herself to death. It's a recurring theme, and in Tudor England, people unwittingly used poisonous ingredients in their cookery because they thought they were tasty ingredients. Another lady is accused of getting out of bed at night and going to the kitchen to get some wine for her sick partner. because, yes, back then, wine was often considered to have a higher level of hygiene than water. Instead of drinking wine, he drank some rat's anguish and water, and, well, the husband died. On the other hand, a rat's bane was commonly confused with some other substance. It was done on purpose with the intention of taking someone's life. The unfortunate courtier and writer Sir Thomas Overbury, who was held captive in the Tower of London in the year 1613, was subjected to this while he was there. Overbury was a close acquaintance of Robert Carr, who was a favorite of King James I when he came to power in 1603. During that time, King James I ruled England. Things went downhill for Overbury after he voiced his displeasure with a marriage proposal involving Frances Howard. As a result, Overbury was incarcerated on bogus claims and sentenced to time served. Overbury was supposedly poisoned with arsenic by Howard when she was detained, because Howard believed that Overbury would divulge some of her dirty laundry while she was there, including some scandalous encounters, which would put her marriage in jeopardy. In the end, some of his jailers and some of their accomplices were either put behind bars or put to death for their role in the conspiracy. During the Tudor era, smoking meat was a traditional pastime, and it was not unusual for big chunks of bacon, called glitches, to be hung up the chimney to dry out and smoke. However, as the heartbreaking story of Elizabeth Brown demonstrates, even this might be fraught with peril. Brown was working as a servant in the mansion of a wealthy nobleman when she was involved in a tragic accident that took her life. She was supposedly squished to death when the big glitches fell on her when she was warming herself over the fire following the break in the rope that was carrying the bacon up the chimney. Believe it or not, working on clocks was just as risky as working with bacon during the Tudor period. Clocks were another thing that were just getting started during the Tudor era. When clock towers initially started becoming a thing, there were some difficulties in figuring out how to repair them. This is to be expected with anything brand new. In the year 1513, the town of Bungay, located in Suffolk, England, was the scene of a terrible event. A laborer named John Townsend was working on repairing the massive clock mechanism affixed to the top of the town's church tower. One day, when he carried the mechanism down from the tower, it slipped out of his hands and crashed to the earth below. That is, not to the ground itself. Before falling to the ground, William Brett, a little youngster, took a blow to the head that knocked him unconscious. In spite of the efforts of the local medical personnel, William Brett did not survive the injuries he sustained and passed away the next day. The dreadful event, which was seen as a tragic accident that could have been averted with more care and attention, severely shocked and grieved the people. During the peak of the clockmaking industry in Tudor England, accidents such as the one involving Bungay were not an uncommon occurrence. This was due to the widespread installation of clocks in public places. There was an upsurge in the frequency of accidents that included clock weights or other clock components falling off of the clock. Bloody Mary. Catherine of Aragon, who was Henry VIII's first wife, gave birth to a daughter who was nicknamed Bloody Mary. It is possible that Bloody Mary had a deeper affinity for those who carried out executions than her father did. There were some theological underpinnings to the reasoning for it. Mary was a devout follower of the Catholic faith throughout her brief reign, which lasted from 1553 to 1558, comprising just over 5 years. She did all in her power to overturn her father's decisions, which marginalized Catholicism in favor of Protestantism and the Church of England. Many of the laws that her half-brother and the Sikhs had created during his brief rule that benefited Protestantism were removed by her and replaced with ones that favored Catholicism. She also fiercely recruited Catholic Spanish advisors who supported her in her persecution of Protestants. When the Heresy Acts were established in 1554, it became illegal to criticize Catholic beliefs. This was especially true for anyone who opposed the Catholic concept of transubstantiation, which stated that bread and wine symbolically became the body and blood of Jesus. This event is considered to be the beginning of the persecution of Protestants. Many Protestants were taken into custody due to their refusal to ingest anything that contained the name of Jesus. They were then presented with the choice of converting to Catholicism or being killed by fire. The most well-known incident of persecution of Protestants due to their marital practices is the Oxford Martyrs, which featured 3 Protestant bishops: Hugh Latimer, Nicholas Ridley, and Thomas Cranmer. In the year 1555, they were tried at Oxford for heresy and sentenced to death by being burned at the stake. The assassination of these senior bishops was meant to act as a message to other Protestants, letting them know that their beliefs would not be tolerated and that England would soon become a Catholic nation again. It is estimated that between 280 and more than 600 Protestants were put to death over the entirety of Mary's reign. The persecution of Protestants in England due to the Marriage Act did not just affect England. A great number of additional individuals were imprisoned or forced to leave the nation. George Browne, the Catholic Archbishop of Dublin, Ireland, was in charge of legalizing the practice of burning Protestants alive in Dublin and other areas. As a direct result of Mary's campaign in support of burning, there was a significant amount of dissatisfaction and protest taking place in England at this time. But unfortunately, she suddenly died from what most people believe to be uterine cancer before a serious coup could be pulled off. Once Elizabeth became queen in May, practically all of Mary's religious rules were overturned. Elizabeth was the first Protestant to succeed Mary. Mary had a half-sister named Elizabeth. Because of the influence of the priest hunter at a time when Elizabeth I was leaning oppositely, the official religion was once again more closely aligned with Protestantism than it was with Catholicism. The pendulum would continue to swing from Protestants being persecuted to Catholics being persecuted, and this time it would be the Catholics' turn to meet their maker's axe. So, would you have survived in Tudor England? Please let us know your responses in the comment section below, and remember to like and share. Also, hit the subscribe button to find notifications on the latest uploads on the channel. And as always, see you in the next video.